Argh, Not Another Podcast, hosted by William May, in which the author finds himself embroiled in a podcast about book publishing.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Argh, Not Another Podcast. Today's episode is all about building a community around writing. But before we begin, I really want to share some personal, some difficult news. My younger brother, Eugene Harris May, died. It happened very suddenly. And as you might expect, it's been very difficult for everyone who knew and loved Eugene. I do feel fortunate, however, that my brother was very much a builder of community himself. In the roughly 2 weeks since he passed, not a single day has gone by when I haven't been reminded of the ways he supported and connected the people around him. And now how they want to turn around to support my family in his absence. And that makes it feel especially fitting that today's topic is all about building community. And it's just serendipity. We had been planning this episode for a few weeks already. And we're very fortunate to have with us a special guest, someone who I actually met recently at AWP, and that's my guest today is Ryan James Dailey. He's a speculative fiction writer, editor, and publishing professional who helps authors find clarity in their stories and connect with readers. He's known for writing speculative fiction for readers who don't want to be scared but want to survive. Ryan combines storytelling expertise with practical insights on branding, pitching, and audience building. Through his writing and teaching, he helps authors uncover what makes their work and themselves unique, turning that clarity into compelling stories that resonate. But specifically today, what we're here about is because Ryan is also a central figure in his writing community in Washington, and I'll let Ryan talk about that in a minute. But now, Ryan, when we first met, one of the things that happened was literally you opened up your community to me at an event. Literally, we were at a cocktail reception, and I was sort of looking, I guess, like a lost lamb wandering around, and you came up to me and were like, "Hey, join us," and basically became my first AWP friend. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you. And that means a lot because you weren't the only one that was lost. I just saw another traveler and there you were. And I just want to give you and your family my condolences. As someone that's lost a brother, I empathize and I understand how difficult it will be. And I think it's especially poignant that the topic of this conversation is community because, at the end of the day, we've got a lot more in common than we have different. And I think the best thing in the world is being able to come together and be supportive for one another. So I appreciate you having me here. I really do.
No, it feels very serendipitous in a strange way that this is the topic that we'd already been planning on. And, as I said, my brother was very much a community-minded person in a lot of ways that I don't think I'd even understood, that until just recently. The number of people who have said to me, like, people he went to college with who were like, he was one of the people who made my college experience really special by, his presence and by the people he brought into my life and all of that. So like, it's feels really great that we're able to talk about this. Even though my brother wasn't a writer, I know that he would want us all to be able to find connection and to build for ourselves a community. And now I know before we get into your personal background, why don't you talk for a minute about your writing group? And
Okay. Yeah. So I am a member and a leader in this organization we have called the Olympia Writers Group. It's a small group of writers that gets together on a weekly basis. Sometimes we meet twice a week. We have a couple different functions, but the primary one is a critique group. So we meet for 2 hours. Everybody gets 15 to 20 minutes, and you share. And after you're done sharing, the group takes turns and we provide feedback. And you also have brought copy that the other members will comment on, and so you have that to take home with you. And it's a really wonderful thing. It's humbling to begin to begin with. It's very intimidating, but sticking through it, and I've become personally invested in the not just the stories that these folks are telling, but their adventures as well. So being there and being part of their success, seeing somebody get a book deal or go into submission purgatory, it's very exciting. And there's a lot to be said about surround yourself with the people that you want to be like. So if you want to be an author, this is the way to do it.
yeah, now how did you find your way into the group or get
Oh,
involved there?
yeah, Facebook. I was looking for community. I believe I am really fortunate in that I found this specific community that I've found. I don't have a lot of experience with other writing communities, though I talk to people a lot, and they let me know how much they appreciate this specific group because they have been in other groups. And yeah, it's just I think a lot of luck on my part, and just having a community here in town that is the way that it is. So yeah, definitely social media networking. That's real. That's the way I found it anyway.
Right. And I know you just mentioned that like one of the big problems is that like it's finding a way to create a group that really works for people. And part of that is obviously the people themselves, but part of it is also, I think, structural and creating a system for people to be in
Mm.
together in community, and especially when you're talking about things like critique. So I'm curious, what is your group's approach to critique? Do you have certain guidelines? And how do you, I mean, both from the perspective of finding ways to encourage new members or inexperienced members to feel comfortable sharing their opinions, and also finding ways to make that useful for the person who's being critiqued at the same time, and not necessarily, I mean, I think that there's a danger sometimes of things getting egotistically bound in a way that makes it feel either uncomfortable for the person giving the criticism or the person receiving it. And so I think that there are certain, I wonder what guidelines do you think you guys have established, or was it just a natural fit in your group?
I'm sure that it was the composition of the group is such that these people are really fantastic. We're populated by like retired teachers, lawyers, pediatricians, soldiers. Absolutely everybody is in this group. So we've got a broad set coming in and that are actively engaged in the critique process, and they not only want the best for themselves, but they want the best for our community as well. So when it comes to that specific framework, that's tricky. It's a hard thing to answer because there are so many things going on when it comes down to that. But I think a lot of it is you come into the group and you observe. and the people are really, really engaging. They're very patient. When um, that's how I've developed into a leader, is because I'm I guess inherently supportive. So when we get new people commenting on the Facebook page, I'll encourage them. I'll give them the information, just to get them in. And then when they show up, we had a new gentleman. He showed up. Not this week, but the previous week, and he's nervous. Understandably, I was nervous too. I get it. So, but I just let him know. It's like, if you got something to say, go ahead and say it. Don't be shy. The best way to learn this thing is to do this thing, and we're not going to be right. I'm not always right, and I'm so sure my feedback doesn't always land. But the more that you do it, the more that you practice it, the better you get at it. So it just comes down to a lot of repetition. So coming into a group that is established is a big win. Um, Apparently this one, I've only been a member for about 3 years. It's been, I don't know if it was a joke. They like to mess with me, but I think 25 years. So it's been going on for a very long time. So this formula is very figured out, and it's very structured. Our color primary leader, Leslie, she writes she writes nonfiction about hikes and fire lookouts and stuff. She's really awesome, but she makes sure that we stick to the program. We show up, we start at a certain time, we end at a certain time. She keeps the time. Uh, I think the structure does a lot of the heavy lifting for you. So, this is how much you expect to bring, and this is your allotted time. And when it comes to critique or feedback, that's the thing that we're going to talk about. It's just how subjective it really is. So it's not something that's clear or laid out, and it would be something that could entirely depend on context. One conversation we'll have one week may not, be suitable the next week. It just really depends.
I mean, it sounds like a lot of the work is done also by having that intentionality in terms of building not just a critique group, but a community.
Mhm.
That, like, I mean, from what you're saying, that like trying to have that outreach of like making sure that when people come, they know they're welcome and that they feel comfortable being in the community, in the group, that they feel supported and, you know, connected, as it were. I'm curious, in doing things to build that relationship for like new members, because obviously, I mean, in a certain way, you did that for me, as well. And is that something that is that just your natural inclination, or is it something that you sort of modeled as you were involved in the group?
Um, I am definitely a personality. I am not probably the standard personality. Like, everybody is very welcoming and engaging when you get there, but I will go out and actively collect people. But it's the composition of people. We all have our strengths, and I've made some lifelong friendships from this group in particular. Lance, the fellow that you met at the cocktail party where we did our
Right.
sample critique. I would not have met you if it were not for him. I had an agent ask me for my horror manuscript a couple weeks ago at another
Oh,
convention. That
congratulations.
Thank you. I'm very I'm very excited. Also a little intimidated, but that would not have happened if it weren't for Lance. So he's it's the beauty of community thing, and it's really subtle at the
Right.
time, and your life changes in fantastic ways. So
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the powers of community is that it's sort of a multiplier for your efforts. It's everybody when you're all pulling together. You're kind of able to like get a larger influence than you might as an individual, and you're going to have other people to sort of resonate what you're doing and out into the world for you, just as you're doing for them. So I think that's one of the key things. I mean, it's also, I think one of the things that's really important also is like you're talking about your journey in your career, and you mentioned being there with other writers through that process, which can be very frustrating. And I mean, I'm wondering, how much do you feel like uh, support each other as a community when you're dealing with those aspects? Is it just this is what I'm going through? Is it more, or is there more of a a process that you're like dealing with as a group?
I mean, it's personal and it's group. The especially handling the well, it's hard enough to write a book. It's even harder when you realize that you have to write it like 4, 7,
Right.
12 times, and then
Yeah.
you have to make a summary, and then you have to make a query, and then you're putting all this effort into it, and you're going out, you're putting yourself in front of these agents and stuff. And I've got to I think anybody that's doing this has a folder in their email that's for rejection. So you're just like piling it up, piling it up, piling it up. I think it's a good luck thing because they say, once you get to about 300, then you start having a little bit of success. So it's an involved thing when it comes to community because we do, as I know in my community, those of us that are at that point in our process, we do a lot of exchange. We do a lot of feedback. There's a lot of support. There's a lot of involvement and engagement. But at the same time, this is always keeping in mind that, you don't necessarily respond to the feedback, every
Right.
time. And I think that's something that people should keep in mind when we're coming into this, because the critique isn't necessarily meant for you to change or address a specific issue. It's to enable you to better see your work from another person's perspective, so that you can ultimately craft it into the story that you're trying to tell, and make that more accessible to everybody. So in that process of the querying process, and working with each other, trying to develop that skill set, you come around to it. But I can't see any. I'm sure it's happened, but I find it difficult to believe that anybody has had success in it by going it alone.
I mean, by its definition, publishing is a communal effort. You can sit down and write a book, but you're never going to get it published without, like nobody is going to go through the effort of like building their own printing press and, making the book. Like even a self-published book involves other people. I mean, if you talk to people who are self-published, who are serious authors, they have editors that they're working with.
Mhm.
They have, designers who are working on the books. I mean, first of all, like I've said this before, but like writing a novel, even the worst novel you've ever read, is a Herculean effort. And
Yes.
I have a huge amount of respect for anyone who finishes the novel. And I've read some terrible novels in my life, and I'm like, you know what? Like this, I read a novel that was written by someone fairly young. They were a teenager, and it's not good. It's just it's just not. But I'm amazingly like you know respectful of the fact that like someone at that age did what they did. Like even a bad novel is a huge accomplishment. And the only way that a bad novel, like every novel, I think starts out as a bad novel, if you
Oh
really
yeah.
want to know. Like it doesn't become a good novel without a lot of honing. And
Mhm.
that's, part of this process that you're talking about. It's having the ability to turn to other people and get, a perspective on like what is or isn't working. I mean, I often tell people my perspective on critique a lot of the time is that like what people tell you to do is not the important part. It's
Mhm.
what they're pointing out is not working.
Yes.
Because and I'm curious for you in looking. I know you said you don't have a lot of experience with other groups,
Mhm.
but do you think there are certain pitfalls that people can avoid in terms of establishing a process for critique if they're building a group, or you know what I mean? Like, are there certain ways you would recommend to sort of build that?
I think yes, absolutely. As I started off as a pantser and I still pants a lot. I didn't, I heard about these majestic beings called outlines, and I did not discover them, in their utility until recently. Um, so I
I mean,
that
I'll tell you, years ago, I had a writing teacher, and you know what he said? He
Hmm.
said, you write the book, then you outline the book, then you write the book.
See, that's really good feedback. So, but I think it would be, that's the difficulty in doing a structured writing group because you want to have that established expectation and that framework coming into it. So I think that, that's part of the reason, I wanted to come on here and speak is so I can, share that groundwork for people that are interested in establishing community or growing community or making a meaningful change in their community. So it's coming up with a structure and really just adhering to it as much as you can. I mean, there's a lot to be said for the democratic process, but at the end of the day, too many chefs in the kitchen, might make a otherwise savory dish like too salty. So having that balance, having that consistency really goes a long way. So I think having a clear framework going into it and trying to stick to that, but also at the same time not being so rigid that you can't make accommodations is
Right.
yeah is I think what will attract people.
Yeah. Now, what would your recommendation be for someone who does want to start, building a community for themselves? I mean, do you have thoughts about? I know you didn't build your writing community, so I
Mhm.
don't know what your experience in that is, but I know you also have talked about how you're one of the people who tries to sort of keep it going by bringing in new people. And, so I'm wondering your thoughts on, trying to begin building a community for yourself if you're not lucky enough to have one already pre-made for you.
Yeah.
So what happened was we were at an event, and you invited me over to join you and I'm sorry,
Oh,
Logan
Lance.
was
Lance.
Lance. Okay.
Yeah.
Lance and you and I were talking, and at some point you said, "Hey, let's do a little critique."
Mhm.
And we each like pulled up something short that we had written, and we passed it around on our phones, and we talked about it for like, just a half hour. We just went around
Mhm.
doing like a little three-person critique,
Yeah.
impromptu. So I just
Yeah.
want to give that, I think that's what you were getting towards when
Mm.
you were discussing this. So I just want the reader to, or the listeners out there to understand what we're discussing.
Yeah. Well, and so I think that's a testimonial for me is that how did that impact you? Like what because that's the format that I have in mind, but I was thinking of trying to spread it online and hopefully, that'll inspire people in the real world to develop centers in their community. So, what how do you feel about that experience and how the community could benefit from that?
I mean, I think for me, as someone who went through an MFA program, I'm a little bit like I'm very like comfortable with critique.
Mhm.
I've had that ego driven out of me where it's like if somebody says this sucks or like is it's like okay, like like I'm not personally invested in the way that someone who might be new to criticism is. So I felt very comfortable going into that space.
Mhm.
I think also that like we were in an environment that encouraged it because we were surrounded by writers and that's why we were all there. So I mean I think those things sort of made that more feasible in that. But I mean there's also the sense of generosity of just, hey, I want to see your work. I want to see what you're writing. And I think that's a big part of it. I mean, I remember when I was an undergraduate, one of the things that was really magical for me as a writing student was that like I could write something and walk out my door with it printed out, and within half an hour, I'd have people reading it.
Mhm.
And like, now I can literally write something and it can sit in my computer for a year and no one other than me has seen it, you
Yeah.
know? And so, I mean, I think having, that kind of community and the ability to be like around people who want to share what they're working on and want to see what you're working on is, I think, a big motivator, both in terms of like keeping your creative practice alive, because, it can be hard when you're isolated to convince yourself like, no, I'm doing this work and it means something and it's going to be in the world. And it also, like, I think connects you to, as we were talking about, it gives you a sense of a different kind of perspective on what you're doing. I mean, and I think that to me is really, one of the things that I look for in critique is that sense of I want to get better. No matter how good my work is, there's always more that I can be doing.
Absolutely. So I think that goes, that kind of touches back on the subject of, making sure people feel welcome and supported. But, this is also an insight into, the utility of specific feedbacks. Not everybody is going to be there um, to participate the way that other people are wanting to participate. And that's not, to say anything bad about them, but especially in my critique group, it is, a self-filtering system. So if if there are people that, it doesn't mesh with, they don't have, the same interest in critique and development, they just stop coming. And it's not because anybody's not being friendly or welcoming. It's just, that's not the experience that they're looking for. So fortunately, the guardrails are inbuilt to that system when you maintain it. and
Yeah.
i and I hope people like that, I'm happy to see them there. I just, really at the end of the day, I hope they find a space that, is beneficial to them. And if that's a different format, then that's what it is. um I want everybody to find their place and to feel comfortable and experience development.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I mean, I think the writing world is a very broad, diverse community in general, and there's no way that we're all going to fit into the same mode. I think this is one of the things that like has come up about MFA programs over the last 10 or 20 years is that like there's got to be more diversity in terms of what we're doing and how we're teaching writers and what we're doing for writers, because it's not going to work for everyone, and it's going to also it's flattened certain aspects of the creativity, and I think that's one of the reasons why I think we're very lucky to live in a time where it is possible to reach out and connect with people. I mean, like you're in Washington, I'm in New York, Denise is in Arizona right now, Maggie is all the way in Portugal, and yet here we all are together,
Mhm.
you know, right now for this podcast, and that's kind of the magic of our era. And I think it makes it possible to see, hey, maybe I'm not in a place where there are a lot of writers, but I can still find a writing community that I can connect with. Um, I am curious to ask you, in terms of the structure of your writing group, to get into some of the more specifics. For example, are there certain commitments that you make when you show up? Like, are you supposed to always show up with something ready to be critiqued, or is that sort of you don't necessarily have to have something? Is it
um
like,
okay, so the rules are, you don't have to have something to you don't have to show up and have something like, i'm I'm busy and I've got a lot going on and I'm editing this horror manuscript. So I've already got my beta feedback, I've got my outline, I'm in rewrite, so I'm not necessarily open, to bringing in something I'm mid edit, and put it in
right?
front of the group because I've already got the feedback. So I go to, I find it more rewarding, in supporting my fellow authors and I'm still developing, my skill set while we're doing that. But so the structure for our meeting is this is what we tell everybody when they're coming in: is show up with 6 pages of double spaced 12-point font. So that's that's how much we expect you to bring in. We're pretty fluid. Bring a little bit more, bring a little bit less. It doesn't matter. You're not going to get a chance to bring 20 pages. And talking about the self-filtering thing is, if you bring, say, our recommendation is bring in 6 pages. If they bring in 10 and they insist on reading the 10, well, they're not going to get that afterward time for the roundtable for everybody to supply their feedback. So it's really to their detriment if they're not sticking to the structure. So you show up with that, and you get, depending on how many people show up, we'll go 20 to 15 minutes. And so you bring in, oh yes, so you bring in the 6 pages, but you bring in 6 to 7 copies, and you distribute those around the table. So people are taking notes while you read it out loud. And then once you're done reading it out loud, then we'll go around the table. Everybody will give their feedback, and then all the copies come back to you. You get to take them home, and next on to the next person. So we just do that until everybody's done. It's fairly regulated, and I can't envision a way to make it any better.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a fairly simple process, and one that, like, I think it's more about the framework that you were talking about, of the implicit attitudes and the sort of the mentality that you've established around the community itself that really is probably the key thing in terms of what you're receiving from that group and what you're building.
Mm-hmm.
Does that resonate?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Everybody is there for the same thing. They really are. And you can feel it, when you show up, and yeah, that's just, they're committed, and it's not even a hard thing to adhere to. It feels right.
I'm curious, in terms of commitment, how do you feel like your writing community, like what in terms, I know for a lot of writers, it can be hard to build a consistent practice. It can be difficult to keep going. And having that accountability. And I'm curious how you feel the community, sort of impacts that for you, for other people.
Oh man. So wow. Everybody's writing process is as unique as they are as a person. So um, it and it's the darndest thing. We're talking about community, but we're also talking about one of the most isolating things that anybody can
Right.
endure is the writing process. So what really got me on the road was the now defunct NaNoWriMo. So it's the November Writing Challenge. And if people aren't familiar with it, what it is during the month of November, for each of the days, you write 1,667 words. And by the end of the month, you've got a 60,000 page manuscript. I had, books in me. I knew that they were in me, and I fumbled with writing for a lot of my adult life. I dabbled here and there, but it wasn't until I found that specific community aspect that I found a framework that worked for me. So by the end of that first November writing challenge, I had those 60,000 words, and I kept on writing, and it grew into a 170,000 word fantasy manuscript that and this was a few years ago. So it's sitting. It will need to be edited, because anybody that knows anything about the industry knows that is entirely too long, especially
Yeah, I was going to say it's
but
probably about twice as long as they really want it.
yeah, especially if I were to be a first-time author trying to put out a fantasy manuscript, that is just entirely too long. But that goes a lot to say, it says a lot about writing community, is that I found that, and that was my first real success in writing a full-length novel. And since then, I've written like 4 more, in a short order of time. So, my writing process is not like it is during November. During November, I will sit down and I will hammer these things out. But the rest of the year, I'll write for 2 months, and then the next month I'll go into hibernation. I won't do anything because that's just, I guess, who I am as a writer. If we talk about Stephen King, and habits, so he sits down and he brings home 6 pages of clean copy every day. That's the way. That's the only reason he's been able to be as prolific as he is because he has that routine. So the best thing that people can do when they want to develop their writing routine is to find out what works for them. Push yourself. Don't take it easy on yourself, but also don't terrorize yourself, because you don't want to punish yourself into something. You're going to resent the experience. You're not going to enjoy it. And it should be a joyful experience. It should be a hard experience, but it should be a joyful experience. So really, try other people's ideas. Don't take them as law, because there is no law in writing. We're just trying to do the best we can, but experiment. And really, the most important thing is that you just write sometimes.
Yeah. So now I'm trying to think of how to like sort of bring this together for people in terms of like building, finding their own community. Like, first of all, do you have advice like for people looking around at writing communities, how they can voir dire whether or not a specific group is right for them? Is it just trying a bunch and seeing what works for you? Is it like, are there specific things questions you would ask people to think about for themselves that might help them make those make that decision or make that effort?
Absolutely. I think the first question someone should ask themselves, the first question you want to ask is to yourself, what am I looking for? What do I want to get out of it? And I think a really important aspect is that, am I open to these possibilities? It's really good to have a specific objective in mind. At the same point, you want to be open to experience, because there's always going to be something that we're not thinking about when we're going into these things. So when it comes to analyzing or assessing a potential writing community, I would say talk to people. A lot of the times, they've got Discord, there's Facebook groups, there's other apps that you can get on your smartphone for like meetups and things like that. So you ask questions of the community members, go up there and try them. I say try them a couple times, because it's not always going to feel like the right thing, out of the gate, and maybe it's not. But I believe that we should try, things at least twice, just to be sure. Getting in there, knowing what you want for yourself and what you want out of the community is going to, determine whether or not you sustain your relationship with that particular community. So I think, yeah, definitely talking to the people and getting out there and actually trying these things. I'm sure there's another scientific process, to developing, these relationships and these communities. I don't know. I think the in-person or a structure similar to this is really the best way to go, is to have that communication.
Yeah. I mean, I think so much of it comes down to finding the people you fit in with,
Mhm.
and that's a trial and error process. You're not going to necessarily. I mean, you can get very lucky and be like surrounded by like very warm, loving people who fit with you. You can also walk into a room and be like, I have definitely been in places where I'm like, the stuff these people is writing and the things that they're interested in do not mesh with me, and
Mhm.
I don't feel like this is not where I need to be right now with with what I'm doing and what and I can't like, and part of it is like I feel bad talking about what I think about their writing, because I know the things that I'm seeing in it aren't the things that are relevant to them, because I'm not their reader.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, like, I'm never going to be the guy to critique police procedural, because I'm going to be like, yeah, well, but the cops are like, I don't want the cops to be the good guys, like in my brain. Like that's, I have my own political agenda about this, and I'm not going to like, and so I mean, there are times where you have to be able to sort of like recognize what you are, and for me, a lot of the time when that happens, I kind of get into language mode, where it's like I can critique the language without critiquing the story, as it were. You know what I mean? I can talk about the mechanics, and as a poet, that's important to me. It's not like I'm not doing something that I think matters, but like I also know that's not in a fiction critique what the person is looking for. Um, I'm also curious. Like, I mean, you talked a little bit about this, but I'm wondering if, as we're getting towards the end here, you can talk a little bit about how being part of your group has helped you in your own writing journey, and how you found what were, like, when you started out, were you already submitting work, um, or were you sort of just dabbling in writing at that point?
So by the time I joined the Olympia Writers Group, I had um, three novel manuscripts already finished. And for me, it publishing was never a priority. Um, and that goes back to the conversation about surrounding yourself with the community that you want to be. So there's
Right.
these people are driven, they're interested in publishing, and I'm interested in publishing. This seems to be like this magical aspect to getting the agent, getting the book deal, getting your book out there at Barnes and Noble, some 3 a.m. rain swept airport, and someone's picking up your book and they're sitting there reading it for 5 hours while their life changes. It just sounds like, but it was never the most important thing to me. Um, and that goes a lot, that says a lot about these writing communities, because they do help orient you. I don't feel pressured to do any of this stuff. And, when I do take these steps, I find I'm developing more and more community. So it's incredibly rewarding. And it comes to the development of myself through the group. I remember my first day there. I had brought a part of a science fiction novel I wrote, and it was just we all know what info dumps are. This was an info dump. It was poetry meant just for me. I'm describing this nanotech city and the people and stuff. It was like an essay, and um and this is going to speak to like treating people like a person to person basis. So we're going to talk to people one way or another. I'm very engaging, lighthearted. So when a retired English teacher told me bring something else next time, that was the exact feedback I needed, because this wasn't something that anybody should have read. It was nothing that anybody was going to enjoy. This was something that was for myself, and that's the lesson that I
Yeah.
learned. So the next time I showed up, I brought something that I thought people would enjoy, and I got some really good feedback, and I've been just getting even better feedback ever since. So it's the smallest things, and I will anybody that's trying this out and they're putting themselves out there and they're taking the risk, they're opening themselves up to this process. You're gonna drive away you know having this roller coaster of emotions, being like, what am I doing here? Like, this is like, I'm saying the dumbest stuff, I'm getting the strongest feedback, and then you show up the next week and it just gets better and better, and sometimes more intense. But that's part of the process. That's part of honing ourselves. You got to get dull and get sharp again.
Yeah. And I'm wondering, I think we're probably getting. I know Maggie, you had a couple of questions that you wanted to ask.
I mean, actually glad I listened until now, because you said that, I've been part of, and I helped organizing like a writing group here in Porto, in Portugal, because I don't live in Porto anymore. But I helped, like getting some new members, welcoming them into the community, also providing feedback for the first time. And I'm someone who writes mostly poetry and short stories from time to time, but I'm not really, I think me becoming part of this group gave me the clarity that like I am someone who mostly writes for myself.
Hmm.
And this is the thing that you said right now about the essay or like the science fiction that you wrote, and like I would get good feedback on some of my poems and also on some of the short stories that I shared. It was a once a month writing group, and it still keeps going. I just stopped going because it didn't work for me, and it doesn't provide any let's say it didn't provide much for me, not because it's not good. It's actually great because they do have so they have twice a week. It's an in-person event, twice a week, just write. So they just gather for twice a week and they just write, and then once a month they have a feedback community. And I was part of this once a month providing feedback to other people's like fiction and poetry and nonfiction. And I felt very uncomfortable, being part of the providing feedback process because I'm someone who even I think William can speak for himself. I read his novel, but before I read his novel, I kind of had to come to terms like, okay, I'm not going to look at his novel as a marketeer. I'm just going to look at it because I'm someone who reads a lot. I'm just going to look at it as like, am I enjoying what I'm reading? And like, I had to take off one hat and put another hat. And I read it in like several, like I think 2, 3, 4 days. And I was like, okay, this works for me. Okay, I have a question about this. And like having this critique was very hard for me. And like, I think the only question I think I have towards the end of this conversation is like, how do you manage to get different people from different genres, like someone who writes poetry and someone who writes nonfiction or fiction? How do you get them kind of work together? Did you find it hard? Was it something that just came like naturally? Do you divide your group into different genres, or yeah, that's the only
Okay.
thing.
Yeah. So when it comes down to orienting the group in smaller versions, we really only do that. And this is a good thing, but it's also, it feels like a bad thing. Is the more people that show up, it's awesome because there's more people in the group, but you're also having to split up. So I don't get to keep up with this group of people or this group of people. So, but when that does happen, we do tend to split up into likewise groups. So the fiction people with our group is a lot of fantasy writers, and our group is also a lot of nonfiction writers. So when we do end up doing splits, which isn't all the time, when we do that, we will turn into these little enclaves, and I think that's just because that's their personal interest. For me, it's different. I'm omnivorous. I love everything, and I love being involved in what these people are doing. So for me, it's a different experience. But I think for the average person, we are inclined to stick to like, and I think that it goes. There's a lot to be said about that because you have more exposure to it. You are more familiar with it. You are more competent in handling the material. So that's a good thing. But when it comes to cross genres, poetry, nonfiction, fiction, um, I think that there are specific critique tools, that William may be able to speak about because he's got a good philosophy when it comes to critique. So hopefully we'll get him to comment on that. But um, put you on the spot. But it's a different experience, but this a lot of this goes back to the attitude and the critique mindset is that we're all wanting to provide the same experience, get the same experience. So we're my group is exposed to all of these different types just all the time, and it's seamless to me, but I'm sure it's not to other people's. Poetry critique is not necessarily going to be the same as a fiction
Right.
critique. So, that's developing a skill set, and really at the end of the day, it's not it's not the little things, it's asking the big questions, and hopefully that people will be able to, bring that, clarity forward in their manuscript is what we're looking for.
For me, one thing I think about a lot, and I think about this as a writer, but I also think about it as a reader and a critic of other, or not a critic in a professional sense, but as someone offering critique to other writers. I think every piece of writing has to teach the reader how to read it. You know what I mean? That you start out and you sort of have to show the reader what game you are playing as a writer. And I think that for me, when I'm looking to do critique, the question that I always want to ask is, have you done a good job of establishing that, and are you playing the game that you said you were playing? And if you're not, which may be perfectly reasonable if you're trying to, do something of a certain sort, there are times when violating the reader's trust is part of what you're doing in that sense. Are you achieving it, in a way that works in the piece? So I mean, I think that's universally true, no matter whether you're talking about fiction or nonfiction or poetry. I think with poetry, there are, there's a different level of, you kind of have to get more microscopic in terms of what you're looking at. You get closer to the text in terms of I don't think that it's usually not going to be that when you're looking at a piece of fiction, you're going to spend 20 minutes talking about a comma. But when you're critiquing a poem, I have been in a room where you spend 20 minutes talking about a comma, and it's a serious conversation. You know what I mean? Because there's a degree of textual intimacy that you need when you're critiquing poetry. Whereas with fiction and nonfiction, a lot of the time it's more about looking at the structure and the ideas and the narrative flow, or if it's a lyric piece of nonfiction, for example, just the structure in a general sense, and whether or not it's achieving a larger scale of work. So I mean, I think that's one thing that I think about. I mean, I think, I also think what's really, one thing that I point out to people is that when you're writing nonfiction, you almost don't have to worry about whether or not the details are realistic. When you're writing about fiction, you can't put in a detail that people are going to be like, oh, that would never have happened. I read a story by somebody, and they talked about a very precocious baby in the story. And it was a fictional story. And they were like, but the baby actually did that. And he was like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't seem real in the story. If you were writing a piece of nonfiction and you said, this is what happened, it's going to have a different resonance because it's in the context of a piece of nonfiction and you've established yourself as an authority in this, telling the truth. So,
yeah,
I mean,
it's more important to be realistic than truthful in fiction.
Right. Yeah.
I think this has been a great chat. And what I loved about it is the two perspectives about community, because you've both, between the two of you, you've had a great amount of experience, various types of community. And I love the idea of content versus language, and also precious versus non-precious. That's what I was sort of getting from it. It's almost like, how precious can you be? Should you be precious? Should you not be precious about your work? Because in the end, you want to find an audience. A writer wants to find an audience. But my question would be, do you think it makes sense to some of these groups if you invite readers in? Like, for instance, my brother David, since we started off with brothers, this conversation, he's an avid reader. He can't sit still, except when he has a book in his hand. And he will go to the library and he'll rent a book. And it's so funny because I'll always ask him, what are you reading? He'll tell me. And then he kind of goes through this is a great book. I'm really into it. Or he'll say, I've been reading it and I can't get into it. I might return it, but I'm going to give it another couple pages. And so it's almost like the reader wants to enjoy the book. and they want to be entertained, or they want to be taken someplace that they haven't been before. So my question is, I guess, Ryan, would you bring in people to kind of critique, like real readers? Like, do you do that in your groups? Do people that appreciate writers, do they come to the groups, or is that it's just writers only?
Anyone is welcome, to be perfectly honest. When it comes to the critique group, I think the primary focus of that is developing your critique skills. So it's a lot less, um, you know, reading for other people than it is, developing, that critique skill for yourself. So while you're in the critique process, you're developing your critique process. But that goes on to a further conversation of development. And we, you know, before the querying process, in the editing and stuff, we do reach out. We develop our community of readers, so beta readers. So it's not just writers that are giving critique, but we will, I've got friends I approach with my writing that read for me that aren't writers themselves. So they are a large component in that critique circle. They're just, they're not also writers, but they're welcome. They're indispensable. They're absolutely indispensable. You can't have writing without reading. It just wouldn't work. Yeah.
Right.
Cool.
Yeah. I mean, I think also I would say, I mean, I think that it's essential to have people read your work who aren't writers before you put it out there.
Hmm.
But one thing to realize is that a writing critique group would not be meaningful for writers if they weren't learning about how to write when they were going through other people's work. It's not like, 90% of the time that you're in a critique group, you're not going to be the focus. Probably more than 90%, depending on the size of the group. And, yes, you're developing skills as a critic and as a reader of other people's work, but you're also learning the skills that you're going to have to apply to your own work. And you're also like dissecting how somebody does something. So like when I look at a piece of writing that's really good by another writer in a critique group, part of what I'm trying to do is to like reverse engineer the motor of it. That what are the things that really make this work? Not only because I want to be able to say to the person, hey, this is what you're doing and I see it and I get it and it's really working and these are the things that I think are your skills here, but also because I want to be able to understand how they did it so that I can apply those skills in my own way. And I think, there's also a degree to which I think there's a certain amount of there's a different camaraderie between writers because we're all in the trenches. And while writers absolutely love our readers and want to connect with our readers and they are essential, I think that there's a different energy that exists when you have a room of people who are all invested in being communicators and writers that I think is important sometimes in that kind of group. And I think that at the same time, as Ryan said, it's essential to have beta readers or just a community of people around you who like don't necessarily write and who will read your work from that perspective. But I think those things kind of have different phases in the process.
That's
Absolutely.
great explaining. That's great. It really, really makes sense. And I think it's a good tie-in and a good way to say that I think we've come to the end of our recording
I mean,
time.
I was just going to ask Ryan if there was any final parting words, any bit of advice or something we didn't touch on that you think is important to share with our listeners.
I'd say reach out. If you're interested in community, look for it. If there's no community, you can be the person to build it and people will show up. So I think if you're interested in that, get a hold of myself. I'm sure you can get a hold of William, the rest of these fine people, and we'll figure it out because they're like William said, we're from across the entire planet right now, and we've come together in this way. So you can do that online too. It doesn't have to just be in person. So it's there.
Yeah, and so
Yeah.
so Ryan, you brought it up. So now, how can people find you?
So you can find me. I'm on basically every platform, or you just go to Ryan James Dailey, DAILEY.com, and that's my website. It's got every possible way to get a hold of me or check and see what's going on. So yeah, that's the best way. And I'm more than happy to be as supportive or informative as anybody needs when it comes to anything. But yeah.
That's great.
And does your writing group have have an online presence that, if people even just want to see what you're doing? Or
yeah, absolutely. We have a Facebook page. That's the primary thing. Is it's just the Olympia Writers Group in Olympia, Washington. You can find us on Facebook. It's a closed group, but you join and you just hop in there. We'll answer any question. Really, really good group of people.
So I think that just leaves us to thank you again. And this has been really, I think, for me, it's been very positive, and I really am glad we were able to share this. It's been a rough time for me recently, and being able to put out good energy and hopefully get people connected to each other feels like just the right thing to be doing. At this point in my life, it feels like a way to honor my brother. And it feels like just I can use all the good energy I'm putting in the world right now,
That's great. And thank you, Will, for being here and being so vulnerable and being so honest, as always. And Ryan as well. Thank you so much. It's been pretty amazing. So wishing everybody a great rest of the day. Maggie, you want to sign off?
Thank you so much for everyone who listened and for both of you guys. We need more men like this. That's all I can say in the end.
Thank you so much.
We should title the episode, "We Need More Men Like This."
I think that's a little, that may not quite be the line to end on.
No, I'm not sure.
We'll fix it in the edit,
No, I meant in terms of the title. I don't think that's, but I do appreciate the sentiment.
Is that critique, William?
Everything's critique if you look at it properly.
I make people, what I do in this podcast is I make people laugh. That's what I do.
Excellent.
Thank you so much.
We appreciate you, Maggie. Thanks. Great.
Thank you.
Long days and pleasant nights.
Yes.
Bye.
Argh, Not Another Podcast is produced by Denise Marsa, Maggie Dimitrova, and William May. Please visit WilliamMayWrites.com for social media links, recited poems, and more.